Interesting development in the war in Yemen as Saudi Arabia keeps up its offensive against Houthi rebels. The former president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, who's said to be on the Houthi side, has asked for safe passage out of his country. Forces loyal to Saleh have been helping the Houthis fighting those who back President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi. Saleh's request, we understand, has been rejected by the Gulf Cooperation Council, that is the GCC. Let's go to Mohammed Val in Jizan, near Saudi Arabia's border with Yemen, about 100 kilometres away from Yemen, as I understand it. Mohammed, about an hour ago, you broke this story to us here on Al Jazeera. I wasn't quite certain whether you said that Saleh was already in Oman, or whether he's still in Yemen and looking for a safe way out.
No, David, he is still in Yemen, but he has sent his envoy, his senior aide, Abu Bakr al-Qirbi. According to the reports, he sent him to Oman to bring this message to the GCC leaders, basically offering to leave Yemen safely along with his family in exchange for abandoning the Houthis. Actually, this particular point about abandoning the Houthis, we have now received some more details about it. In the message, seems that Saleh has actually told the GCC leaders via his envoy that he has no ties whatsoever with the Houthis and that he's not part of this war and he is not supporting the Houthis. Of course, this contradicts what he has said earlier when he sent his son, Ahmed Ali Abdullah Saleh, just before the beginning of the strikes, sent him to Riyadh with the same offer but with conditions at that time. Now, Saleh has no conditions. When he sent his son, he said among those conditions that he wanted his son to be the president of Yemen or to be able to run for the election, and also that he is going to abandon the Houthis. Now, in his present message to the GCC leaders, he says that actually he hasn't been part of this. He hasn't been with the Houthis. He has no ties with them, and he just wants to leave Yemen safely. Apparently the GCC leaders have categorically rejected that offer.
Mohammed, thank you very much indeed. We're going to bring in one of the major players in all of this now, Jamal Ben Omar, the United Nations Special Advisor on Yemen. Very good to have you with us on the News Hour. Let me ask you first about that breaking news that Ali Abdullah Saleh says, I am not supporting the Houthis and I want out of my country. What will that do to the Houthi offensive, do you think?
Well, look, the Security Council just adopted a new resolution on Yemen, and in the resolution includes expanding, the scope of sanctions, here one of the people including the sanctions is the son of the former president and also Abdul Malik al-Houthi. But for the Security Council and for all the resolutions, when it comes to people obstructing the political process, the reference has been to the Houthis on one hand, and then to Saleh and his supporters. Yemen now is in a very serious situation. Yemen is in a state of civil war. There is a lot of fighting going on in the south. The country is fragmenting. There is a humanitarian situation that's been accentuated by all this fighting that is going on. There is shortage of food, shortage of water, more than 120,000 displaced people in Yemen. What's got the situation to where it is now is really the obstruction that impeded, the political process and led to the violence and for the situation, to become out of hand.
Let me put it to you that it wasn't just that it may have been the way that the whole thing was handled. There have been those who suggested that the inclusion deficit, in other words, your attempt to bring everybody into the process, merely encouraged the Houthis in their view of what they could and couldn't do, and brought about a conflict which could have been avoided.
Look, the one thing that was distinct about the political transition in Yemen is that it was an inclusive transition. It came about as a result of face-to-face negotiations that I facilitated in 2011, in November 2011. And the Yemenis at that time made a deal, to start a transition, a transition from Ali Abdullah Saleh's rule to more democratic governance. And in this context, they agreed to have a national dialogue process. In that national dialogue, they agreed, the Yemenis, that they need to include all the groups who had not been in the political process, all the extra-parliamentary opposition, and these include the Houthis and also the Iraq in the south.
What I want to ask you about is why, if you had such a good plan, couldn't you make it work?
Okay, this is not my plan. This is a Yemeni plan. Yemenis decided to have a transition through a negotiating process in 2011, and then they had a national dialogue, that went on for 10 months. They agreed on the blueprint, for new governance in Yemen. And then some of the political actors, including the Houthis, and Houthis in particular, they started using violence to achieve political aims. So it is the action of the Houthis and also the mistakes made by other Yemeni political actors who led to the situation escalating and to this state of affair. Our job as United Nations, it was to facilitate, to act as a mediator, facilitating talks, facilitating a process. This is what we're trying to do. But at the end of the day, the responsibility rests squarely with the main political actors. And here, in terms of this recent adventure, the Houthis' escalation.
So there was nothing that you could have done to prevent this?
Well, look, our job, as I said, was to facilitate and support a political transition. But this was a Yemeni-led transition. Yemenis who came together and made the hard choices, the hard decisions on how to move forward. They made a number of deals that they respected. They made deals also that were never implemented. So what we are hoping is that they will go back at the end of the day. They'll have to go back to a negotiating process where they can agree to stop this fighting and then to put the transition back on track to complete what remain of the tasks that they were agreed on under the GIST initiative and implementation mechanism, like approving a new constitution, electing elections under the new constitutions and so on. But in this context, also addressing the whole issue of violence and armed groups and the expansion of the Houthis that led to all this havoc. So as United Nations, we can only advocate for a Yemeni-led process, a Yemeni solution, and this means necessarily resuming political negotiations.
Last year, the Atlantic Council, well-respected organisation, wrote about your plan that there was a transition set in motion by Ben Omar in 2011, moving forward, increasingly unsteadily. But it ends with this question. Is this a peace plan that has simply delayed the inevitable turmoil? And I wonder if what your thoughts are on that statement and whether you see any way out of this.
Well, look, it will be wrong, to think that, it was a beautiful transition running smoothly and suddenly, the Houthis or others appeared and they spoiled it. There were some inherent flaws. There were problems and roadblocks since the transition agreement was signed in 2011. I told the Security Council in a briefing after briefing, I brief the Council every 2 months, and every 2 months I told the Council that there has been obstruction by former elements of the elements of the previous regime. I told the Council, when the Houthis advanced on Amran and then on Sana'a, I had plenty of opportunity to warn the international community on what to come. But at the end of the day, this is a Yemeni process, and Yemenis, unfortunately, as I said, played politics, partisan politics, and some of them also, instead of using the language of violence, they pursued the language of dialogue, they pursued violence in order to achieve political aims. And this is what led to this sad state of affair, and a transition that was going fine, but then it's run into serious trouble and it's been derailed.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Ben Omar, the UN Special Advisor on Yemen. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us on Al Jazeera.